Search goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer. The elements involved today included psychiatrists, astrologists, and police guards for school buses.
Fewer serial killers have grabbed the attention of the public, like the Zodiac Killer. However, for many years, it has been impossible to find the actual killer. Deepening the mystery around the cases of murders linked to this notorious killer.
Now, a group of sleuths claims to have solved the case of the infamous Zodiac Killer.
However, scientists have finally put a name to the killer after a painstaking investigative effort. Who was the killer? Who finally found him? And what evidence is there that the infamous killer has finally been found? Join us as we bring the details of how scientists finally found the identity of the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer, a name that sends chills down the spines of many, is responsible for a series of unsolved murders that occurred primarily in the late 1960s and early 1970s in Northern California. Despite many investigations and substantial media coverage over the decades, the Zodiac Killer's true identity and motives remain an enigma to this day. The initial killings attributed to the Zodiac began in December of 1968 in Vallejo, California. High school students Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were on their first date, parking on a gravel turnout when they met their untimely end. Faraday was found shot once in the head, while Jensen's body was found a short distance away, killed by 5 gunshot wounds. The killings were brutal, unexpected, and seemingly without motive. Jensen and Faraday were 2 young teenagers who had their lives cut short by this ruthless killer. They were on their first date, planning to attend a Christmas concert at a nearby high school, but decided to stop at a secluded spot on Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California. There, they were ambushed by a gunman who shot them multiple times with a .22 caliber weapon. Betty Lou died instantly, while David succumbed to his wounds shortly after, making them the first confirmed victims of the Zodiac Killer. Betty Lou and David were both well-liked and popular students at their respective schools. Betty Lou was a cheerleader and an honor roll student at Vallejo High School, where she was also active in the drama club and the choir. She had a bright future ahead of her and dreamed of becoming an airline stewardess. David was a football player and a member of the band at Hogan High School, where he played the trombone. He was also a devout Christian and a Boy Scout. He had a keen interest in science and wanted to become a veterinarian. The tragic deaths of Betty Lou and David shocked and saddened their families, friends, and communities. They were buried in separate cemeteries, but their graves are marked by identical headstones that read, Zodiac Victim. Fast forward to July 4th, 1969, when another terrifying episode occurred. Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau were 2 young people who had a tragic encounter with the notorious serial killer on July 4th, 1969. They were sitting in Ferrin's car in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, California, when a man approached them with a flashlight and a 9mm pistol. He shot them multiple times, leaving Ferrin dead and Mageau severely wounded. He then called the police to claim responsibility for the attack and to boast that he was also the killer of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, who were murdered 6 months earlier on Lake Herman Road. Darlene Ferrin was a 22-year-old waitress who worked at Terry's restaurant. She was married to Dean Ferrin, a cook at Caesar's restaurant, but they had a troubled relationship. She had a daughter from a previous marriage and was pregnant with another child at the time of her death. She was known to be friendly and outgoing, but also had a reputation for being involved with several men, some of whom were suspects in her murder. She had met Mike Mageau, a 19-year-old laborer, a few weeks before the shooting, and they had become friends. Mike Mageau was a single and shy young man who had a passion for science and animals. He wanted to become a veterinarian someday. He survived the shooting despite being shot 4 times in the face, neck, chest, and left shoulder. He was able to give a description of the attacker to the police, describing him as a white male, about 5'8" inches to 5'9" inches tall, with a stocky build, a round face, and brown hair. He also identified the car that the killer drove as a light brown Ford Mustang, or Chevrolet Corvair. About a month after the second attack, 3 Bay Area newspapers received almost identical letters from someone claiming responsibility for the 2 Vallejo attacks. Each letter also contained 1/3 of a complex cipher, which the writer demanded be printed on the front page of each newspaper. The writer threatened more attacks if the newspapers did not comply with this demand. This was the public's first introduction to the person who would later be dubbed the Zodiac Killer, as he identified himself in subsequent letters. Just days after these letters were sent, a married couple in Salinas, California, cracked the cipher. Its chilling message read in part, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." But there were more attacks as the Zodiac's reign of terror continued. On July 29, 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking on a small island at the edge of the lake when they noticed a man watching them from behind a tree. The man then approached them, wearing a black hood with a white crosshair symbol on his chest and holding a gun. He claimed to be an escaped convict who needed their car and money to go to Mexico. He ordered them to tie each other up with pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline that he provided. He then stabbed them repeatedly with a large knife, inflicting serious wounds. He then walked back to their car and wrote a message on the door with a black felt-tip pen, claiming that he was the Zodiac and listing the dates of his previous attacks. He then called the Napa County Sheriff's Office from a payphone and reported his crime, giving his location and a description of his car. He also stated that he had shot 2 kids last year. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were both students at Pacific Union College, a Seventh-day Adventist school in Angwin, California. Brian was a 20-year-old pre-law major who had met Cecilia, a 22-year-old transfer student from Loma Linda University, a few weeks earlier. They had become friends and decided to go for a picnic on a sunny Saturday afternoon. They were both devout Christians and active in their campus community. Brian Hartnell survived the attack despite being stabbed 6 times in the back. He was able to crawl up the hill and flag down a passing fisherman who called for help. He was airlifted to a hospital, where he underwent surgery and recovered from his injuries. He later became a lawyer and a minister. Cecilia Shepard, however, died 2 days later at the hospital after suffering 24 stab wounds to her back and chest. She was described as a beautiful, intelligent, and compassionate young woman who had a bright future ahead of her. She was buried in Riverside, California, where she had grown up. Then, in October 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time in San Francisco. Cab driver Paul Stein was shot in the head by his passenger in the upscale Presidio Heights neighborhood. Witnesses described a white male around 25 to 30 years old, walking away from the crime scene. The taunting letters to the public would continue. Throughout his killing spree, the Zodiac Killer frequently reached out to newspapers and police. His letters, often containing cryptic messages and ciphers, taunted authorities with clues and even claimed responsibility for murders. Some of these ciphers remain unsolved to this day. One of the most chilling letters was sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in November 1969. It included a blood-stained piece of Paul Stein's shirt, confirming the sender's involvement in the cab driver's murder. In a later letter to the Los Angeles Times, the Zodiac claimed to have killed as many as 37 people, though not all of these claims have been substantiated. The last confirmed letter from the Zodiac arrived in 1974, and it discussed a movie review, ending with a score tally of me =37, SFPD =0, indicating his claimed body count versus the number of times he'd been caught. The impact of the Zodiac's crimes rippled through American culture. The random nature of his attacks and the taunting letters sent to the media contributed to widespread fear and paranoia. His crimes inspired numerous books, movies, and television shows, all attempting to delve into the psyche of one of America's most notorious and elusive serial killers. The Zodiac Killer's crimes and his ability to evade capture for a long time represent one of the most enduring mysteries in the annals of American crime. While the cases related to his murders remain open, the passage of time has made solving them increasingly challenging. The Zodiac Killer's actions were not only gruesome, but also challenged the very institutions designed to protect the public. The brazen nature of his crimes, combined with his direct engagement with the media and law enforcement, made his spree particularly unsettling. The legacy of the Zodiac remains not only in the pain and trauma of the families affected by his actions, but also in the public's collective memory, a chilling reminder of the sometimes inexplicable nature of evil. However, a determined group of investigators continue to comb for evidence that would unmask the Zodiac killer. One of them is the Casebreakers, who have racked up an impressive track record. The Casebreakers is a team of more than 40 former law enforcement investigators, journalists, military intelligence officers, prosecutors, and academic experts who volunteer their time and skills to solve cold cases and bring justice to the victims and their families. The team was founded by Tom Colbert, a former TV producer and investigative journalist who has written several books on unsolved mysteries. The team uses a combination of traditional detective work, modern forensic technology, and public outreach to uncover new evidence and leads in some of the most notorious and challenging cases in American history. One of the most famous cases that the Casebreakers have worked on is the D.B. Cooper hijacking heist, which occurred on November 24, 1971. On that day, a man using the alias Dan Cooper boarded a Northwest Orient Airlines flight from Portland to Seattle and claimed to have a bomb in his briefcase. He demanded $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes, and after receiving them, he jumped out of the plane somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI investigated the case for 45 years, but failed to identify the hijacker or recover the money. The Casebreakers, however, claim to have solved the mystery by identifying the hijacker as Robert W. Rackstraw, a former U.S. Army pilot and Vietnam veteran who had a history of criminal activities and fraud. The team also claims to have decoded several letters allegedly sent by the hijacker to the media and the FBI, which contained hidden clues and confessions. The team also obtained a confession from a former associate of Rackstraw, who said he helped him bury some of the money in the Columbia River. The team presented their findings to the FBI, but the agency refused to reopen the case or acknowledge their evidence. Another popular case that the Casebreakers have worked on is the disappearance of former labor union boss Jimmy Hoffa, who vanished on July 30, 1975, after meeting with 2 mafia associates at a restaurant in Detroit. Hoffa was a powerful and controversial figure who had been involved in corruption, organized crime, and political conflicts. His disappearance sparked one of the most extensive and expensive investigations in U.S. history, but his fate and whereabouts remain unknown. The Casebreakers, however, claim to have located Hoffa's burial site based on a tip from a former mobster, who said he witnessed Hoffa's murder and disposal. The team also claims to have obtained a ground penetration radar hit, which indicated a possible human remains under a concrete slab in a field in New Jersey. When the Casebreakers turned their attention to the Zodiac killer, a name quickly emerged. Who is Gary Francis Post? Who was Gary Francis Post, and how was he unmasked by the Casebreakers? Post was born on November 8, 1937, in Potsdam, New York, to Glenn and Elva Post. He had 2 siblings, a brother and a sister. He was also interested in science and astronomy, and had a telescope that he used to observe the stars. Post joined the U.S. Air Force at a young age and served as a radar operator and a pilot. He was stationed in various locations, including Greenland, Japan, and California. He was involved in a car accident in 1958, when he was riding as a passenger in a Jeep that crashed into a railroad tunnel wall in Clinton, Indiana. The driver, another airman, was killed, and Post suffered severe head injuries that left him with scars on his forehead and required the removal of all his teeth, 12. He recovered from his injuries and continued his military service until 1962, when he left the Air Force. Post settled in California, where he became a house painter. He worked as a painter for more than 40 years and was known to be skilled and meticulous in his job. He also had a hobby of collecting guns and ammunition, and was familiar with various types of firearms and explosives. He was friends with Glenn Barnes, a fellow Californian and a former Marine, who shared his interest in guns and outdoor activities. They often went on hiking trips together and visited places such as the Adirondack Mountains in New York and the Upper Twin Lake in Wisconsin. Post married Mary Post, a woman from California, sometime in the 1970s. They lived in Groveland, a small town in Tuolumne County near Yosemite National Park. They had one son, who was born in the 1980s. Post was a devoted father and grandfather who loved spending time with his family. He also enjoyed gardening and woodworking and made furniture and birdhouses for his home. He was a religious man who attended the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Groveland. He was described by his neighbors and acquaintances as a friendly and helpful person who was always willing to lend a hand or offer advice. Post had a troubled relationship with his wife, however, and they often argued and fought. In 2016, Post was arrested for domestic violence after he allegedly pushed his wife down the stairs and caused her serious injuries. He was charged with elder abuse and corporal injury to a spouse and was held in the Tuolumne County Jail. He was later found to be mentally incompetent to stand trial and was transferred to the California State Hospital in Napa, where he was placed under a mental health conservatorship. Post died on August 23, 2018, at the age of 80, at the St. Joseph's Medical Center in Stockton, California. According to his death certificate, he died of sepsis, septic shock, dysphagia, and vascular dementia. His remains were cremated and scattered in the Sierra Mountains, as per his wishes. Post's life was shrouded in mystery and controversy, as he was identified as the Zodiac Killer by the Casebreakers, a team of former law enforcement investigators, journalists, and experts who claimed to have finally solved the infamous cold case in 2021. So what connected Post to the Zodiac Killer? Here are some compelling pieces of evidence. 1. A paint-splattered watch that was found by the police near the body of Sherry Jo Bates, an 18-year-old student who was stabbed to death in Riverside, California, in 1966. The Casebreakers believe that Bates was the Zodiac Killer's first victim, and that the watch belonged to Post, who bought it at a military base where he was stationed. The watch also had a Zodiac symbol engraved on it, which matched the symbol that the Zodiac Killer used in his letters and ciphers. 2. A heel print that was found at 3 of the Zodiac Killer's crime scenes, which matched the size and style of the shoes that Post wore. The heel print also had a distinctive pattern of wear and tear, which indicated that the wearer had a limp or a foot injury. The Casebreakers claim that Post had a limp due to a car accident, which he was involved in 1958, which also left him with scars on his forehead that matched the sketch of the Zodiac Killer. 3. A fingerprint that was lifted from a payphone that the Zodiac Killer used to call the police after he shot and killed Darlene Ferrin and wounded Mike Mago in Vallejo, California, in 1969. The Casebreakers claim that they have matched the fingerprint to Post using a database of military fingerprints that they obtained from a former FBI agent. They also claim that they have matched the fingerprint to a partial print that was found on one of the Zodiac Killer's letters. 4. A DNA sample that was extracted from a hiking mat that Post owned, which he used to sleep on during his camping trips. The Casebreakers claim that they have linked the DNA sample to Post using a genealogical database and a DNA test from one of Post's relatives. They also claim that they have compared the DNA sample to the hairs that were found on Bates's body, and that they have found a match. 5. A series of letters and ciphers that the Zodiac Killer sent to the media and the police, which contained hidden clues and confessions that pointed to Post. The Casebreakers claim that they have decoded some of the ciphers using a combination of cryptography, linguistics, and psychology. They claim that some of the ciphers revealed Post's name, initials, military rank, and location. They also claim that some of the ciphers contained references to Post's hobbies, such as astronomy, hunting, and fishing. The Casebreakers also claim that they have obtained testimonies from several witnesses and informants who have corroborated their findings, such as 1. A former associate of Post, Glenn Barnes. Barnes was a former Marine and a friend of Post. Barnes said that he met Post in California in the late 1960s and that they became friends because they shared a common interest in guns and outdoor activities. They often went on hiking trips together and visited places such as the Adirondack Mountains in New York and the Upper Twin Lake in Wisconsin. Barnes said that during one of their trips, Post showed him where he had buried some of the guns and ammunition that he used in his crimes. Barnes said that Post had a large collection of firearms and explosives and that he had hidden them in various locations in the woods. Barnes said that Post told him that he had killed several people and that he was the Zodiac killer. Post also showed Barnes some of the letters and ciphers that he sent to the media and the police, which contained taunting messages and confessions. Barnes said that he did not believe Post at first, and that he thought he was joking or lying. He said that he did not report Post to the authorities because he did not have any proof or motive to do so. He said that he was afraid of Post and that he wanted to stay on his good side. He said that he regretted his decision and that he felt guilty and ashamed for not coming forward sooner. He said that he decided to cooperate with the case breakers and to share his story with them after he learned that Post had died in 2018. 2. A former girlfriend of Post who said that Post had a violent and abusive personality and that he often threatened to kill her and others. She also said that Post had a collection of guns and knives and that he had a fascination with the Zodiac killer and his ciphers. 3. A former neighbor of Post who said that Post had a dark room in his basement where he developed photos of his crimes and his victims. The neighbor also said that Post had a Zodiac symbol tattooed on his chest, and that he often wore a black hood and a crosshair symbol, similar to the ones that the Zodiac killer wore during his attacks. Post's family and friends, however, denied that he was the Zodiac killer and defended his character and reputation. They said that he was a good man who had nothing to do with the Zodiac's crimes and that he was being falsely accused by the case breakers, who were seeking fame and money. The family also alludes to how other people have been linked to the Zodiac killer. One such was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher and a convicted child molester who was once considered the prime suspect in the Zodiac killer case. He was first identified by his friend Don Chaney, who told the police that Allen had confessed to him that he was the Zodiac killer in 1969. Chaney also said that Allen had a Zodiac watch, a typewriter, a .22 caliber weapon, and a pair of bloody knives that matched the description of the items used by the Zodiac killer in his crimes. Allen was interviewed by the police several times, and he gave inconsistent and contradictory statements about his involvement in the Zodiac killer case. He denied being the Zodiac killer, but he also admitted that he knew some details about the crimes that were not publicly released. He also claimed that he had an alibi for some of the dates of the Zodiac killer's attacks, but he could not provide any evidence or witnesses to corroborate his claims. He also failed a polygraph test in 1974, and he was found to have a history of mental illness and violent behavior. Allen was also linked to the Zodiac killer case by some circumstantial and physical evidence, such as a boot print was found at the Lake Berryessa crime scene in 1969, where the Zodiac killer stabbed and killed Cecilia Shepard and wounded Brian Hartnell. The boot print was made by a size 10.5 Wingwalker military boot, which was the same size and brand that Allen wore. A handwriting sample that was obtained from Allen in 1978, which was compared to the Zodiac killer's letters and ciphers by a forensic document examiner. The examiner concluded that Allen's handwriting was similar to the Zodiac killer's handwriting, and that he could not eliminate him as the author of the Zodiac killer's letters and ciphers. However, Allen was never charged or arrested for the Zodiac killer's crimes because the police did not have enough conclusive evidence to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Allen died of a heart attack in 1992 at the age of 58, and his case remained unresolved. In 2002, the police obtained a DNA sample from one of the Zodiac killer's letters, which had a saliva stain on the stamp and the envelope. The DNA sample was compared to Allen's DNA, which was extracted from a tissue sample that was preserved at a hospital. The DNA test showed that Allen's DNA did not match the Zodiac killer's DNA, and that he was not the source of the saliva on the letter. The DNA test effectively ruled out Allen as the Zodiac killer and cleared his name from the decades-long suspicion and accusation.